My name is Krishnan Gowri, and I'm Director of Building Performance at Intertek. And I've been with Intertek the last 4 years, before which I used to work for the Pacific Northwest National Labs and Autodesk as well. Has anybody here heard of a software called ComCheck or ResCheck? You have heard of it? If you have heard of that software, then you know most about me already. The calculation engines behind ComCheck comes from my Ph.D. work almost 35 years ago. So that's based out of the ASHRAE 90A75, which transformed to 90.189, and subsequently I managed about 17 or 18 different versions of the software before I left the lab. So that gives you a little bit of a background about where I come from. I have a strong background in energy modeling, energy efficiency, and building enclosure performance. Those are my strengths. What we will cover in today's next 45 minutes is to talk about how efficiency assessments are contributing to real estate transactions, and also for the ESG reporting. How many of you have heard of the term ESG? Okay, so that is the new buzzword of the day, right? ESG reporting is something that everybody is talking about, and once when you dive deeper into it, you will realize that it is all the things that you have already been doing, but packaged in a different way so that customers can benefit from it. Okay, so we would cover four learning objectives in this presentation. I'll first introduce the various standards and frameworks for building performance assessment, which in some ways is typically the energy auditing. If you're doing energy auditing, you are already familiar with a lot of what I'm going to be talking about. We'll talk about the tools and techniques that we are using, and some of the standardization and frameworks and forms that we have developed in order to achieve this, that results in presenting the ESG metrics very specifically related to energy performance. Okay, so why are we doing this building performance assessments or energy assessments? There are three major objectives. We will keep coming back to it all through the presentation. Now, because we are a small group, you can always interrupt me at any point in time, and we can make this a two-way conversation rather than a one-way train. Okay, so feel free to raise your hands, stop me up, and then we can talk about it. Prospective buyers are concerned about the operating costs of a property. You know, when we were buying homes maybe 30 years ago, the main thing was what is the loan amount for your purchase, and you were concerned about mortgage. What is the monthly mortgage? That's what we were looking at. But after maybe around 2000, people started to ask for home energy bills. What is the annual energy cost? They wanted to add that to the total loan plus other expenses associated with the home before a bank can approve the loans. So they were using those. And they were mainly used for mortgage approval purposes. But you realize that in a large commercial building, the energy bills can be very significant, and whether it's tenant paid or owner paid makes a huge difference in the way how they view the cost. If it is being completely passed to the tenant, the investor or the owner doesn't really care about or pay much attention to it. That has been the story for a long time. But what is happening now is that with the real estate investment companies, they now need to report what is the carbon footprint of the properties that they are owning, rather than whether they are paying for the bills or not. So this changes the whole attention that they had to pay towards the operating costs. And also the awareness of operational carbon and the embodied carbon. That dialogue has also now made owners to pay more attention to what they're buying. The other aspect of these assessments is that we want to know how is the remaining useful life of the equipment and the components of the building. And there are regulatory compliance when you acquire these buildings. What do you have to report? When do you have to report? And what do you have to comply with? There's a lot of local ordinances that have now come into play, which you have to report your energy use. For example, in Seattle, you have to report the energy use now, and then 3 years from now when you report it, you cannot be exceeding what you have already used. You have to show whether you're maintaining your building well enough that it doesn't become an energy hog. So those are driving owners to really pay attention to this. The other ones are benchmarking to compare with peer groups so that you can market your building as most environmentally friendly, more energy efficient, energy conscious, and so on. We already talked about the finance issues and the incentives associated with it. Now let's look at what is ESG. ESG is very widely used and most commonly heard in the financial markets these days. Everybody, the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, has now implemented a requirement that every real estate investment funds or other funds, they have to make sure that they report the impact of total carbon of their services and their investments. So in order to do that, in order to ensure that there is accountability across these three aspects of environmental, social, and governance aspects, so that they are stewards of the, or representing the society at large. This investment strategy is, every real estate investment company now has to report this annually. And there are targets and compliance goals. These are somewhat voluntary in the sense that you establish your goal. The goals are not yet mandated or regulated, but there are guidelines to set up the goals, and the goals will vary depending on the type of buildings, the total floor area of properties, and so on. And then you have to show an energy accounting or the environmental factors accounting, and then report them at the end of the year. Okay? In this particular talk, we will focus strictly on the environmental aspect. There are social and governance aspects to these ESG metrics, and I wouldn't even pretend that I can talk anything more than those two words. Okay. On the environmental aspect, though, where I'm spending most of my life, it is all about the energy and water use of the buildings, waste diversion, and carbon emissions. And though we are accounting for waste and water use in the buildings, they are currently being just metrics that are collected and reported rather than making a lot of further analysis on those. Whereas with the energy aspect, we are able to do a lot more. The energy auditing has provided a lot of tools and techniques to really accurately report those values and then build on providing value to the owners. Now, we talked a little bit about building disclosure ordinances as one of the driving forces for this ESG metrics as well as for energy auditing. I wanted to highlight a couple of very important aspects of these ordinances. These are requiring all owners to report their energy consumption to the prospective buyers, lessors, or lenders. So this is a regulatory requirement by certain jurisdictions. We will look at the current status of the cities and states that have implemented this. The building owners, these disclosure laws improve the awareness of energy use in these buildings, and they also have significant impact on the economic value of the properties. In order to meet these ordinance requirements, people have to collect energy use data from their utility providers, and then they also have to prepare for an improvement plan if their building is not meeting the requirements as per the ordinance. I've given two links in this slide, one from the ACEEE and one from a company called WegoWise. I'm not sure if I'm able to access any of this. You can click on those links to get to a map like this. I was hoping that we can present that. Now, this map indicates all of the locations. The orange dots are the dots that where these ordinances are currently in place. Though this chart is a little bit older, it gives you an idea of the breadth of these ordinances impacting all the major metropolitan areas. And California has mandated statewide, even though they are not implemented. One of the things we are finding with these disclosure laws is that the ordinances are being resisted by the building owners. They don't want to be doing this extra work to report it, and if their building is not performing, they are also disclosing this as that their building is not good, which loses the marketability of their buildings. But that's the driver behind the city ordinances. They're actually making this data publicly available. You could go to the internet for specific locations in cities, and you can see all of the past year's energy use of the buildings that have been reporting energy use for the last 3 years. Chicago, for example, the rolling report is required. There is mandatory requirement for the buildings, and so the building owner will get a letter saying that it is your turn this year to report your building energy use. Every 3 years is what I think they're asking for, and all buildings above 200,000 square foot were mandatory 5 years ago. Now all buildings above 50,000 square feet is mandatory, for example, in Seattle, and Chicago is one of those that we recently saw as well. So you are going to see such ordinance really transform to decarbonization and other goals, because everybody is now moving towards decarbonization, net zero energy, net zero carbon, net zero cost, of course. So as they move towards it, you're going to see a lot more of these requirements coming into local jurisdictions and being mandated. Now, we talked about energy benchmarking and energy audits. First, we have to say, why do we have to do this, right? Typically, people had no incentive for doing this, but now is a very good time where we can demonstrate real value of doing this, and the value can be in any one of these three aspects. It could be facility improvement, which is addressing O&M issues. The previous speaker, Bhaskar, had shown several of their assessments in federal buildings, but now you will see this is happening in almost every large commercial building, I think, more commonly. They also help identify and improve indoor air quality and staff training needs related to indoor environment in the facilities. By doing this, you're going to have healthy, happy occupants. The second aspect is that you're going to reduce utility bills and reduce overall operating costs. Finally, this is where the ESG comes into play, is reducing your carbon footprint and helping you report the ESG metrics and the energy use information for regulatory reasons. And that is basically driving towards a better future environment for our future generation, that we don't leave a lot of environmentally impacting use of our buildings. Now let's go into the industry standards that we use. There are 3 standards that we are currently using in our practice that we think are fairly well defined structured, and we can deliver quality products. One of the problems with energy auditing is that everybody does it differently, everybody does it on their own ways, and it is adapted or customized for each customer as they want it. But at the bottom line is, if we are able to reference a standard practice or a standard guide and provide all the information in there, then we are able to make it consistent and useful for everyone. The three standards that we are using are the ASTM E2797. It's published in 2015. It's a standard practice. And then ASTM 3224, that was published in 2019. And the very popular ASHRAE standard 100, which is used for energy efficiency in existing buildings. How many of you are familiar with any one or any of these standards? Okay, so we have a few that have already used or familiar with it. But I think if you have a chance, the ASTM standards, both of those, have very structured guidelines for every aspect of report contents. So I would recommend looking at the standard practice and the standard guide, and we will see what the differences are. The first one is the ASTM E2797, and the goal of this standard practice is to provide a methodology for building energy performance assessment of any building that is the subject of a real estate transaction. Now, this provides a methodology to collect and compile all the data related to assessing the energy performance. And the goal here is to say whether your building is comparable and meets the energy performance of a so-called peer building. A peer building is like a peer group building, is a building that is built at the same time frame, vintage, with the same type of occupancy and with similar building characteristics. Basically comparing apple to apples is what you're doing at this time. You're buying a property and we are calculating the EEOI of the property. Now, you don't go to the CBEX data and see if the CBEX is matching with that. That is not really apple to apples. You're going to find out 5 or 10 different buildings in the neighborhood where you're buying. It is almost like comps, as the way they call it, right? In real estate transaction, they do that only for the purchase price and the cost, and they'll give you per square foot. Imagine this is somewhat similar, but this is specific to energy use of the building, okay? So you're doing comps in this case. But it is not your responsibility to go out and find 5 buildings, but there are enough published resources and data already available from which you can calculate this. And one of the resources is DOE High Performance Building Database, if you're familiar with it. And there are other energy disclosure databases in the industry which you can use. And we found a software tool that also is currently available to help with this. So in order to assess this, we need to get the utility data from the buildings. This is a challenge which we will talk about as we go further. Now, bottom line, this is a voluntary standard of practice. Nobody is saying that you must do this, but everybody is going to want to do this because there is a regulatory compliance that is going to require them to do it. So, so you will find that that is going to be becoming more and more common. The next standard we are talking about is a standard guide, and this is E3224. The intent of this standard is to provide a methodology to identify energy underperformance of a building and then recommend measures or recommend actions that you can take to bring this building to the peer buildings. In the previous standard, what we saw was to say whether your building is, how your building compares with the peer buildings. Now we are saying, if there are underperforming components, how can you, improve them so that they can meet the goals of the peer performing buildings. Once again, this also requires energy use information, but in addition, you will have to get data about the building's properties and equipment characteristics, efficiency information. So this is where you will do a field auditing. Now, the level of the field auditing that you will do depends on the level of detail that you want to provide the owner. And in this particular case, this is comparable to level 1 of the ASHRAE audits, if you are familiar with them. We will talk about that next. ASHRAE has this standard 100 that provides auditing procedures for benchmarking and for identifying efficiency measures. So you can view the ASHRAE standard as a technical guide that actually provides the basis for the other two ASTM standards. Okay? ASTM standards are very well structured, and they clearly state what should be the content in your reporting procedures and stuff, whereas ASHRAE standard, though it has some guidelines, it's a lot broader. It tries to address benchmarking, it tries to address field auditing. It also tries to address the investment grade audit calculations to provide life cycle costing information and so on. So this is once again a voluntary standard of practice. Commonly people will talk about this as ASHRAE level 1 and ASHRAE level 2 audits that they do. Okay? We will get into more details of this as well. Right off, we're there. So we are talking about the preliminary assessment, which is the very first ASTM standard that we talked about when they want to compare with the peer buildings. We call that as level 0 audit, because ASHRAE doesn't really have a level for that. Because here you're not doing anything. You're not even going to the site. You're going to get the data, run it either in Portfolio Manager or something, and tell the owner, hey, this is your Energy Star score for your building. That's all you will provide. And that is almost like a level 0. If you are going to analyze the utility billing data a little more and have more billing characteristics information, and you have done a brief walkthrough, you can provide a level 1 assessment. And this is now going to identify, let's say, low cost, no cost measures or some capital improvement measures. And then level 2 is a little more detailed, where you're getting equipment efficiency data, compare it with what the current requirements in the industry are, and look at the expected useful life of the current equipment and see how much energy you will save if you replace this equipment. And that kind of auditing and assessment, we call them as level 2. Level 3, we wouldn't go much into it. This is the domain of the ESPCs. Many of you are familiar with ESPCs. They're really into investment grade audit, where they have to guarantee savings, and they do close monitoring to make sure that they are able to deliver on those assessments or promises. Now, yeah.
Can you go back one slide?
Sure.
I actually think level 3 is an underserved market. Somebody's doing due diligence on a building. They need to find out what the costs are going to be to bring that building to par or average.
Yeah.
And that cost gets negotiated into the purchase price.
Yeah. Go ahead. Can you say your question in there? Yeah. Repeat your question. Yeah.
No, what I was saying is level 3. You mentioned that was more the domain of the energy credits or the energy service groups. I actually think that that's an underserved market. As what that is when someone's going to buy a building and they're looking at the purchase price. That's the point where you bring a financial grade audit in and say, okay, this is what it's going to cost to bring it up, and you negotiate that into the purchase price.
Ideally, you are right if we are able to do that. Normally, when we get a transaction request, they want to make the decision within 2 weeks. They want to make a decision within 2 weeks. And just to know who has this energy bills will take us 2 weeks. So imagine you have to do assessment of this investment grade level audit. It's completely outside the practicality and I would say viability of that. It's great thinking if we are able to do it. So what we do in this particular case, we do what we call it as back of the envelope analysis, if you want to call it, but that is square foot based estimates of energy savings. It's almost like looking at crystal ball, but there's more data available to make sure that that crystal ball estimate is really valid. And we'll go through that. And instead of giving a very specific number, we give a range. We say, if you replace all your LED lights, and normally in a walkthrough, we come back and say, okay, 80% looks like LED. We haven't counted all the lamps. We just will say, okay, they have only the common area with the LED right now. Everything else needs to be replaced. So we can come up with an estimate saying, okay, if this building changes all their lights to LED, they will save X amount of energy in the electric bill. And that we can calculate. There are simple methods and spreadsheet calculations. That's what we are providing. And there we are saying, okay, if you replace all these LEDs, the cost of replacement is X. And so we call something, simple payback period analysis, and we'll say you will be able to save anywhere between 5 to 10%, and in 2 to 3 years or 2 to 5 years. And there are cases where we said we threw our hands up, the payback period will be 20 to 40 years. Whether this makes sense or not, we don't know. And the transaction analysts want only thumbs up or thumbs down. That's what they want to know. Is this fixable? Is this worth trying? In fact, I have had situations where people worry more about the cracks in the driveway path that can break the deal as opposed to our energy performance. So the decision points are so different in transaction. So the only thing we are trying to do in this is to help them with ESG metrics that is meeting the regulatory requirements, and also help them meet the decarbonization or disclosure, energy disclosures. But some real conscious developers and investors are going one step further to get the next one. So we are working with a large real estate investment company that is asking us to do these simple payback periods. Okay?
So acquiring properties is different than managing properties.
Yes.
Managing is under service contracts.
Yeah.
Property acquisition has to do with net numbers that day.
Right.
And there are ESG funds that are looking at, I'm looking at 3 buildings in one market. I want to know which one is the best one based on all those parameters.
Yeah. Yeah, let's keep going. We may
Hey,
be-
Krishnan, can I ask real quick, the level 3 effort, is that part of ASHRAE 100 or is that outside?
It is. It is part of 100. 100 outlines all the 3 levels very well. It's just that I have never done a level 3. It's just you need at least 30 to 50 grand to commit yourself for that, and you have to have a longer term association with these clients. Whereas the properties that we are doing it, they want it for $500, level 1. They want it within 1 hour after they tell where the building location is. We use Google Earth to see what the building is and get the property records out of the internet. So within the next hour, we got to get back to these guys saying that, hey, we need at least 3,000 to do because you have 4 properties in this one location in your transaction. So the challenges here are very different. The interesting thing is we know what to do. And now it's our time to say how we can do it and make money out of this. Yeah. Just wait. He's bringing the.
Yeah, so following up on what the gentleman was saying, you said that it's required now for the SEC to have this energy audit for the sale of, like, is it a certain type of building? Is it a publicly traded building, like for REITs?
Yeah, for all REITs, they need it. But what they're asking for is energy metrics. For the E part of the ESG, they have environmental compliance that has energy metrics. But the energy metrics doesn't come automatically, and we are saying that with the energy auditing, we can provide meaningful and correct ESG metrics.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah, and the level of accuracy that you can do varies very much depending on what audit level and how you're proceeding with it. And our experience with all the real estate investors right now is that they are very much at the level 0, level 1 audit, and that's basically what we're talking about. And sometimes we go to half of level 2, and that's the farthest we have been to. Okay. We'll quickly run through because I have several slides and maybe left only 15 minutes, so we'll rush through. Level 0, I think we talked about it. The only item we are interested in level 0 is calculating the energy use intensity, and that is KBT per square foot. And the total objective here is comparing it to similar buildings. Level 1, we have this energy benchmarking of level 0. But in addition, what we are going to do is now get 3 years worth of utility billing data, enter them into Energy Star, and get the portfolio manager and get them an Energy Star score. Now, this is where we often find ourselves in no man's land because the property is being acquired, the tenants have their bills, and the real estate agent involved has no clue who to contact, and even if we reach up to the property, they say, oh, well, we have a third party that is managing our building and they pay the bills and so on. So there's all sorts of challenges that come into play, and this is where, as energy modelers and energy analysts, we say, you know what, we don't need anything. We know where the building is, we can see on the Google Earth, we'll create a box model, we'll create an annual energy simulation for it, we'll give you an estimated Energy Star score. This is something I developed over almost 2 years to market it and tell people that this is possible and we can do it. And now we have done about 150 buildings. Only about 10% of the buildings ever will give us the utility bills. For about 90%, we just did this box modeling. And guess what? In 1 or 2 of the buildings, we were able to recover the energy bills, and we wanted to compare, and we were within 10%, 5 to 10% of it. So, the experience tells us for investment grade decision making, if you don't have the bill, don't sweat it out. You will waste a lot more time and energy trying to track this bill down. Just go with box models and try to get this done. We talked much about what is involved in level 2. We are doing end use analysis in this case. We are going to look at every component like envelope, lighting, HVAC, and any other process loads. And we will, prepare recommendations based on each one of these components and measures that we can recommend. What is our tool set like? Our tool suite is very broad, and we try to maximize every free tool available in the market ever possible. so that's the name of the game. And in some cases, we try to pay for some because we have no choice. Portfolio Manager is freely available. Energy Plus is available. eQuest is available. PV Watts is available. I'm throwing a lot of names in here, but those of you who have used it, you know what it is meant for. Those of you who have not used it, you probably will not use it, but when somebody says this name, you know that this relates to modeling. Okay, that's the intent here. The most important one at the bottom line is to use the Portfolio Manager. You're going to keep hearing everybody requiring it. Okay. Now, I mentioned that we use a lot of free tools, and we also use a lot of resources. These are, by the way, there's a wealth of information available for assessing energy use. PNNL has prototype buildings, so if you don't know how to model a building using box modeling approaches, just borrow one of their prototype building model assumptions. See what the vintage of the building is, go to the building code of that year or the energy code of that year, get all the components from that, so that, assuming that they were building a code compliant building, that's what we will generate, okay? Or we'll use to assess the performance. All right, we'll go through this process, how we do this. We collect basic building data, which is location, size, occupancy types, and anything else that we can find from either the listing or from drawing sets or information that usually they have a prospectus that the client has when they put this property on the market, and that normally has a lot of marketing information which includes some of these that we will need. So extract that and then look at the utility billing data, and if they were providing it, so better. If not, you use the energy model approach that we just talked about. When we are doing these energy assessments, typically in Intertek we have a whole group that does the property condition assessment. Remember I was telling you about the driveway cracks that could cause the deal to go? They're doing an ESA assessment for environmental safety assessments, and they're also looking at the property records of any fire reports on the property and all of that. So they're doing a property conditioning assessment. Somebody does a very structured approach with the ASTM. I don't want to misquote the standard number. I think they follow to prepare a property condition assessment report. And we take that report, and that report has some high-level information that we could compare and be consistent with. Because we don't want our property condition assessment report to say that the building has LED, and we tell them, hey, you had to replace all the lamps to LED. We'll look really not being right. So we want to, and we don't do a duplication of any of the assessment and data that they have already collected. Finally, we do some assessment of the efficiency opportunities. There are standard ones that we could use, and then we can report on them. The components covered include envelope, lighting, HVAC equipment, HVAC controls, domestic hot water, plumbing fixtures. And then in addition, we also say what is the PV potential for this property. Can they implement solar PV in this? And if they do, how much of savings can they accomplish? And there are enough tools like PV Watts was one of them that we were using. Across the nation, we have done since May of 2021. Right now, the number is somewhere close to 200. I prepared this for earlier this year. So about 200 properties is what we have done similar assessments. And this is done for buildings across 26 states. And we are dealing with 6 major national real estate investment property owners. Overall, we have audited about 12 million square feet of floor area, and it's growing. What we have learned from this is that it was a very interesting observation. During the COVID period, guess which was the building type that was changing hands most? Anybody want to make a guess? Office? No.
Healthcare.
No. Healthcare close second. Warehouses. Yeah. Everybody who had Amazon or somebody with a longer contract, they immediately transferred the property over to somebody and made money off of it. Or something like that. I don't know. They were selling very fast. So there was a lot of warehouses being sold. I don't know if that showed up on this slide. Warehouse is about 18%. But during that period, we were doing nothing but warehouses for a while. And then it was medical office buildings. That was the other one. Anyway, so this gives you a sense of the type of buildings that we were analyzing. So here's a chart that highlights the types of information by category. But where I want to really spend time is that we identify the components on the left-hand column. On the rightmost column, there is something that shows low, medium, high. This is what the real estate investment transaction analyst is looking for. They want to know any red flags in any of the components that are real energy hogs, and then see what the cost or the liability is to improve those. So we have the expected useful life, or remaining useful life, I should say. This is also consistent with the property condition assessments. What did we find most in all of the last year or two of doing these assessments? About 80% of the buildings that were changing hands were needing LED replacements. So that was an easy, quick payback opportunity. Of course, HVAC controls, that's been one of the most challenging ones, and that is another highly recommended opportunity. We also saw a lot of water fixtures. People still have 3-gallon per flush toilets in many of the buildings, and 3 gallons per minute, faucets. Everything now has come to 1 and 1.5 gallon water sense fixtures per flush in GPMs. So of course, they are very capital intensive to replace, but if you are going to be aware of environmental consequences, this is an item to worry. And we also are recommending solar PV and retro-commissioning. So for those of you in the energy auditing world, these are very common. You know it, how it happens. And we are finding we are confirming that that is the case with the current transactions we are seeing. What we have here is a sample of the efficiency opportunities recommendations and the type of information we provide. In any energy auditing effort, people will find energy conservation measures, determine or calculate the implementation cost, and then come up with cost reductions. You see, there is a lot of ranges here. In LED lighting, we are saying it is between 100,000 and 120,000. So there's about a 20,000 range there. We don't know what the local market and the pricing will be, so we are using national prices, and so we try to give, I think, 10% on either side in terms of our margins, because we don't want them to come and say, hey, this costed 300,000 and you told me 100, and that kind of stuff. So we provide that margin, and we calculate the annual cost reduction. Now, this cost reduction comes from recalculating the energy model with the revised LED lighting power densities and resulting electricity savings, convert them to be costs, and come back with what is the impact on Energy Star score. So the last 3 columns in here are new things that we are providing to the user. CO2 emission reduction. What is the potential and what is the range? And Energy Star score impact. And then we also look at local rebate opportunities, in the sense if you go to the utility provider for the zone, you will see that they have an LED replacement rebate incentive. For photovoltaics, they have reductions. They have HVAC equipment replacement, free exchange of hot water heaters if you are over this many period. There are different programs in different regions, and we do research them. We allocate, I think, 2 to 3 hours of researching, because when they are buying the building, we also provide them an opportunity to come up with a plan to improve those or to take advantage of those. So finally, we have this priority where it says the savings potential in terms of both investment to return ratio. Okay. Finally, I think we are getting to see or at least I want to say that in all our assessments, about 2/3 of the assessments are based on energy modeling, and I would say this is even closer to 80%. Okay. By now, that's why. All right, we'll conclude with the real ESG metrics that are used for reporting. Okay, this is the takeaway for the session. Now, the efficiency assessment summaries have efficiency opportunities, energy sustainability audit summaries, which is an inventory of all the items in the building, and then the efficiency measures, PV potential, and utility rebates and incentives. Now, these are giving a full picture of a property that's being acquired, whether it meets the ASTM standard for comparing with the peer buildings and giving an assessment of how good your building is. And everybody knows that Energy Star scores 50 is the median, and 75 is the certification, 90 and above is high performance. So we provide that information to begin with. And then all the other information is additional information which they can use to prioritize their investments after acquiring the property. So one other side benefit when we are doing the Energy Star score is the greenhouse gas emissions, or the CO2 equivalent based on the fuel used in that building. And we translate that to be GHG emissions intensity, which is kg CO2 equivalent per square foot. And this is an ESG metric related to environmental compliance. Okay. Some of our rate owners have compliance goals. They have set up their own goals for their portfolios, and we compare whether this building will add to their portfolio or bring their portfolio down. Okay. For those of you who haven't seen an Energy Star report, this is a sample. And in this sample, you can see that it has the energy use intensity in the first block, and then the greenhouse gas emissions in the second block. It provides you both the site and source. Typically, we are reporting based on site. Okay. The last one is the ESG inventory, and the inventory has about half a dozen items. It includes if the building has already any high-performance building certifications, walk score, which typically you get out from any Google Earth or any other provider that can see based on the public transportation and other available close to the area, that kind of stuff. And if there are any green building certifications, we identify them and report them. Energy Star rating, and then an efficiency inventory, and then a summary of water, energy, and waste utility usage. I think I'm going to conclude with this. After we complete an assessment, we are able to summarize the current condition of the building, and then summarize the efficiency opportunities, and then the potential for meeting future energy reductions to meet the ESG targets if the owner has defined those. With that, I thank you all for being patient and staying with me in the last hour. If you have any questions, please feel free, and I don't want to go past. We are already 5 minutes over the time limit.
We actually have 10 more.
Oh, 10 more? Okay. I try to rush. 8 more. Oh, 8 more. Okay. All right. We'll keep it open for discussion. Yeah. Anyone have any input? Yeah. You want to share the?
I was kind of looking for where you were connecting the standards to carbon emissions calculations. I saw you kind of pulled it up from Energy Star. Is that kind of what you're doing? That
is correct. Well, Energy Star has standardized the conversion factors from, I wouldn't say conversion factors, they're depending on the fuel used, there is a carbon equivalent impact of that fuel type. So if we have provided them the utility billing information, we get the carbon emission in the results there.
Is that addressed in one of the 3 standards you mentioned earlier?
No. The standards do not say the carbon metrics anywhere. They are based only on the EEI data for peer group comparisons. We are not comparing buildings based on carbon footprint We are comparing them based on EEY, and most of the times it's site energy EEY.
So one of the standards says you've got to do a comparison, like a comps, you said like comps for the price, you've got to do a comps for the energy consumption.
Does that mean that you model another building also besides your
No.
own? Okay.
No, we are not doing modeling of other buildings because that will be very hard. There are databases that have publicly reported information for those. And in some cases, it's very hard to get a peer group. In those cases, we default to regional adjustments of energy for that region.
Does Energy Star give you, like let's say you're looking at this city, this type of building,
No.
do they give you something?
They don't even include, interestingly enough, the year of construction of the building in determining Energy Star score. Energy Star score is strictly based on the utility billing information that results in a EEY compared to a 2004 period. So it's somewhat normalized, but it is not really representing a peer group comparison on a regional level.
So how are you doing the peer group here?
There is a different software tool that uses the HPDB, which is the high performance building database. That has over 600,000 buildings, and that gives you, in some cases it gives a fewer sample size, but reasonable enough to compare. Yeah. All right. Any other? Oh, we have a question. Okay.
Krishnan, on the CBEX data, if you give us some comments on its continuity and reliability, and what are some better sources or other equivalent sources to?
Sure. So high performance building database from DOE is the next best source. They are constantly getting public data to be submitted, and then they sanitize this data and then make it available for public use. So to me, that is probably the largest alternate database that's available. But CBEX is in the process of being updated. So I think there is one coming up based on the 2018 data, if I'm not wrong. So there should be one coming by 2024. Don't quote me on it. I don't work for DOE. But
Will that be adequate, or will it be better as it gets older? I mean, you're only going to have a little bit.
So when you look at the energy codes have progressed very significantly from 1999 through to 2014 or 2013, I think, ASHRAE. So it'll be significantly better, and obviously it's going to be more efficient numbers and stuff. So the Energy Star scores will dramatically change. They'll do an update. Yeah. We are seeing that whenever they change. Recently, Energy Star updated the medical office buildings database, and that made a huge jump in the numbers as well. Okay. Yeah. But this is an interesting time in our industry where we can, repackage and get more value out of what we have learned, but we have to be creative enough to apply what we have learned to meet the new metrics that are being brought forth and required by either local jurisdictions or national entities. Okay. With that, thank you for attending. I appreciate everyone's joining here.